Hey, greetings, ladies and gentlemen. We had some problems with our live stream yesterday, and so I wanted to record this message to post for those who were unable to attend our services in person. That way we can all stay together in our studies because we're doing a sermon series through the book of James, and it just wouldn't be fitting if we had a big chunk of our series missing from our recording. So I wanted to make sure I get this recording posted for all to watch. And we had a number of members that were out sick yesterday, so we're praying that they all make a fast recovery, and continued prayers for the rest of us that we don't get sick. But we are continuing our series through the book of James. So if you would go ahead and grab your Bibles and open up to James chapter 5, we're going to be looking at the first 6 verses today. And as you're turning there, I want to offer up this illustration for you to consider. Because I think that this illustration, and it is a true story, really sets the tone and gets to the heart of what James is teaching us in this passage. And that's, again, James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. And so I want us to consider just briefly John Wesley. Now, many of you will probably know him as being the quote-unquote founder of the Methodist denomination. He was a very prominent speaker and preacher in the 1700s. And his dad was a priest, clergyman. I don't know what official title he wore, but he operated in a professional full-time ministry capacity for the Church of England. And so John Wesley grew up. I mean, dirt poor. Hey, even preachers today, it's tough to make a good, comfortable living off of a preacher's salary, and even more so in the past. And so Samuel Wesley, John's dad, I'm sure he did the best he could on the quote unquote preacher salary. But him and his wife, they had 19 children. Unfortunately, 9 of them died at or shortly after childbirth. So John Wesley was one of 10 that were raised, and I can only imagine what that household would have looked like in the 1700s. Not just because there were 10 children growing up, but just the emotional roller coaster and the heartache of having the 9 children that passed away. But anyway, John's parents, they did the best they could. But they had a impoverished lifestyle. And so John, as he was growing up, he said he had one goal for life, and that was, I'm not gonna grow up and be poor. I want to be able to have a more comfortable living than my parents did. And I'm sure that's what his parents wanted, was for their children to grow up more blessed than they were. I mean, that's what all good parents want. And so John Wesley, he was very studious. He worked very diligently, and so he got his degree. Worked his way up and earned a position as being a professor at Oxford University, which had all of the prestige, if not more, that it does today back then. And so got a good job as a professor at Oxford University, and so starts getting a good paycheck. And he admits that his first few paychecks he wasted. He squandered. It's the first time he had real money to do anything with other than just survive off of the absolute basic necessities. So he squandered it on things like gambling, tobacco, alcohol, and even some artwork. And so I want to share this quote from the book titled "What Wesley Practiced and Preached About Money." So I'm just going to read. Bear with me as I read this quote to show what changed John Wesley's perspective on money. Wesley had just finished paying for some pictures for his room when one of the chambermaids, that would be like housekeeping, like room service, came to his door. It was a cold winter day, and he noticed that she had nothing to protect her except a thin linen gown. Now remember, this is 1700s. This is London in Great Britain. London, wintertime, 1700s. There's no heating and air conditioning, and so you've got this housekeeping, this chambermaid, wearing just basically a nightgown is all she has to work in, and she's working just trying to scrape some pennies together. So anyway, so the chambermaid comes in, and Mr. Wesley, he reached into his pocket to give her some money to buy a coat, but found he had too little left. Immediately, the thought struck him that the Lord was not pleased with the way he had spent his money. He asked himself, "Will my master say, 'Well done, good and faithful steward'? Thou hast adorned thy walls with the money which might have screened this poor creature from the cold. O justice, O mercy, are not these pictures the blood of this poor maid?" You see, he had wasted all of his money in buying this artwork. He'd wasted other money in the past on things like tobacco and alcohol. But the point is, he'd wasted all of his money so that when somebody was in front of him in obvious need, he had nothing left to give. And so Mr. Wesley, he learned, from the school of hard knocks, more than any education is life experiences. And he learned from this encounter the value of stewardship and of budgeting. And so he put together a budget after this so that he would use his money to God's glory in a wiser fashion. And so his salary at that time was £30 per year. Which I don't know what that translates to in English dollars today, but my understanding of history is that £30 per year in Great Britain in the 1700s was a livable wage for a single man. Now, not a wage to have a life of luxury, but a comfortable wage for him to do more than just survive on. So John Wesley he added up his expenses for a full year and found that he only needed £28 to continue living in a comfortable manner. And so he had £2 left over, so he would give £2 to the poor. But then he knew that he'd be getting paid more the next year. So year 2 comes along, and he gets paid £60. But you know what? He still only needs £28. So what does he do? He gives away £32. He gave away over half of all of his income because he said, hey, just because I have earned more money doesn't mean that my cost of living has increased. So instead of increasing my standard of living, I'm going to increase my standard of giving. And then year 3 comes along. He now makes £90 a year. 3 times. Now we're really getting up to, he would make enough to live a fairly luxurious life. But you know what? He still only needs £28. And so he gives away £62. Now he gives away over 2/3 of his entire income because he says, I don't need it. I have all that I need. I'm going to give the rest away. And then this continues going on. He eventually gets up to where he's making over £1,400 a year. Very, very wealthy. Not only from being a professor, but he begins writing and publishing books that were bestsellers. And so he made millions of dollars off of his book sales. And so by the age of 87, fast forwarding a lot in his life, by the age of 87, it said that he had around $200 in his bank account. But he had donated over $5 million to charities. When I say charities, I mean to the less fortunate. Through the works of John Wesley, through his charity, he was able to start and to support orphanages. He gave money to poor houses and gave money to countless nameless individuals as he just encountered on a daily basis that were in need. $200 in his bank account when he died, but over $5 million spent helping the poor. Why do I share that illustration today? Because I think it's a great reminder to us that we need to be stewards of what God gives us, that riches are not inherently sinful. God's blessed. There's nothing wrong with appreciating the blessings that God gives us, but we need to remember that the blessings still belong to God. He's just put it in our charge. And so with that in mind, let's go back to James chapter 5. Let's read these first 6 verses of James chapter 5. Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you. Wow. What a powerful and also scary warning that James is giving here. Who is he addressing? He is addressing the rich people, the people who are very well off. And now as I was preparing my sermon notes, there's a lot of debate among historians and the professional theologians who write commentaries, but we see that there's some disagreement over whether the quote-unquote rich that James is addressing here are rich Christians that are in the audience that would be hearing and reading this letter, or if this is a reminder to James's audience of the fate of the rich outside of the church who are abusing those within. So there's a little bit of debate there. We don't know exactly who, but honestly, it doesn't It doesn't matter for our purposes of application today, because whether he's addressing the rich outside the church or the rich inside the church, the principle is still the same. And that principle is stewardship. That is how the money, how the riches are being used. And so to put this passage in context, why does James bring this up now? Why is he talking about riches? Now, if you've been following along with our studies, it seems like we've been talking about materialism either directly or indirectly several times, because this seems to be a big issue for James's audience, for James to write about. Back in chapter 2, we read about how the Christians were discriminating when they would have visitors come. He says, hey, if you have a rich man that comes into your audience and you have a poor man that comes into your assembly, you are to treat them with equal respect. Wow, that is a counter-cultural thing, to give the poor person the same type of respect that you would give the rich and the powerful and the wealthy. It's countercultural today too, isn't it? That we would treat the homeless person with the same level of dignity that we would worship our celebrities and our politicians with. And we see other passages throughout this epistle, throughout this letter that James writes, warning against riches and the way that they're used. And it kind of comes to a peak here in chapter 5. And in chapter 4, right before this, he's talking about the fighting and the division among Christians. And though they might have been fighting and arguing over any number of things that Christians fight about today, we see without question within the context, one of the things that these Christians were fighting about was over wealth, was over possessions, was over money, was over selfish ambitions. It seems that these Christians James is writing to were arguing over what to do with riches. Well, you've got money and I don't have any money. You should give me money, or telling people what to do with what they have. And I mean, I don't want to make up arguments that aren't in the Bible. I don't want to read too much into it, but we see that there was some fighting amongst one another over riches. And one of the points that James makes is, hey, don't judge one another. We have certain liberty with our possessions. We have certain liberty with our riches. And so I can only imagine James's thought process as inspired by the Holy Spirit as he's penning this letter, that we see this passage about not judging one another. And hey, you poor people, don't worry about the rich, but hey, you rich people, don't worry about the poor. And I'm paraphrasing big time, so forgive me if I'm oversimplifying the problem here. But I can just see James's thought process being, hey, if we're going to have some liberty to not judge one another on these temporary matters, I don't want Christians who do have money, who are well off, to think that that is an excuse to do whatever they want with their money, right? Just because we might have some liberty in the way that we use our wealth doesn't mean that we have the liberty to be negligent with our wealth and to be negligent to the needs of those around us. Which brings us to chapter 5 and this harsh condemnation of a fiery fate for those who are rich. So let's break down this passage just with the simple 5 W's, right? So who's being addressed? Well, again, the rich. What's going to happen? They are going to be weeping for their pending fate, for their pending judgment. They're going to stand condemned by God. There's no question. That is going to be their fate, short of repentance happening. So what has already happened? That's the future, is that judgment. But what has already happened up to this point? Well, their riches have spoiled, right? Their riches have rotted. Now the term here, riches, could apply to any form of material wealth. However, that term rotting usually is only applied to things such as food. And so I don't think it's too much of a stretch to think that the riches being discussed about here is, hey, they've got more food than they know what to do with. Their refrigerators are always full, right? Not that they had fridges back then, but they don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from. They have so much food that the food is going bad. Their clothing is being moth-eaten. They have so many clothes in their closet that the moths are eating it up. And they don't even worry about it. They have so much gold and they have so much silver. This could be coins, this could be jewelry, it could be whatever the case. But they have so much that the coins are and the silver and all these things that they're corroding. Because who really cares? I've got so much of it. Why do I care if it corrodes? And so what is the problem here? What is the problem with this wasteful attitude, with this negligent spirit of allowing these things, of allowing their riches to go to waste? Well, it's because these riches, the corrosion, the spoiling of these riches is evidence of their negligence. It's evidence of their hatred for their neighbor. You see, they've stored up all of these treasures far in excess of what their needs are. Meanwhile, while their food is spoiling, their workers, their employees are going hungry. While their clothes are going to ruin, their workers, their employees, the people that they are in charge of, they're going naked. While their gold and their jewelry and their silver and whatever else they have, all of their other riches continues to build up, they're not paying their workers who can't afford the basic necessities of life to continue living. While others around them are suffering, they have pursued selfish pleasures, and they have indulged needlessly in their luxury. This gluttony has turned their hearts into fattened cattle ready for the slaughter on Judgment Day. And in just the same way that a person with anger in his heart has already committed murder, we see here that the person with negligence in their heart has committed murder. What is the real crime here? The crime is that these rich people are not using the riches in the way God wants them to use their riches. The crime isn't being rich. The crime is in not using their riches to help others, and that they are fraudulently abusing their employees and their workers. We don't know exactly how they're doing this. They're not paying their workers enough, obviously, but there's some form of other fraudulent case here in which they are not treating the poor with the dignity, with just basic human dignity. And we know just from history the type of span between the rich and the poor at this time. There was scarcely a middle class in this time, right? There was it was about one in. I got to double check my notes. I apologize. Give me just a second to find my place in the notes. I got ahead of myself here. Only about one in 1,000 people were millionaires. 1 in 1,000 people were millionaires during this time, and about 1 in 50,000 would have been multi-millionaires at this time. And there's not much of a middle class, right? You're either in that like top 0.1%, or you're in the poor class. And there would have been a range. Some people were more well off than others, but for the most part, you had everybody worked for that 0.1%. We talk about the 99% and the 1% today. Well, this was the 99.9% and the 1/1000th of a percent at this time. And so pretty much most people are poor and are dependent upon the generosity of the wealthy to pay their fair wages. And we see here in verse 3 about laying up their treasures. And this should be a concept that should really prick our hearts to challenge us to consider what treasures are we laying up in store. Are the treasures that we're laying up just going to result in the same type of fiery fate that the rich here are going to face, which can bring up questions such as like retirement, saving for the future, saving for retirement, investing, things like saving for children's colleges. These are questions we need to consider about. Is at what point does it become wrong to plan for the future? And this passage is oftentimes here in James is connected with the passage of the rich farmer, right? The parable of the rich farmer in Luke chapter 12, 16 through 21. Luke chapter 12, 16 through 21, in which we see this rich farmer. He's already rich in the beginning. He has an especially high yield one year. He then uses that excess yield to build a bigger barn so that he can retire, eat, drink, and be merry. And so we see that his purpose was, I'm going to build a bigger barn. I never have to work another day in my life. I can just eat, drink, and be merry. I can live for my own self-indulgence from here on out. And so is that our approach to money today? Well, before I get into some principles of why retirement is not sinful and saving for the future is not sinful, let us consider how the typical American retirement is a sinful mindset, right? Because we don't get to ever retire from being a Christian. And so if your idea of retirement is, hey, there's this magic age that I have in mind, it's 40, it's 50, it's 60, it's 70, where I'm going to hit a point in my life where I'll have enough saved up that I can just wipe my hands clean of everything. I'm going to move down to Tahiti. I'm going to just be sipping some, virgin drinks, right, on the beach. And I'll just live the last 10, 20, 30 years of my life with just totally carefree, just taking in every pleasure that I can. If that's your idea of retirement, that would be a sinful concept of retirement, because there is never a time in our lives, and we are supposed to so openly and negligently enjoy nothing but self-indulgence for our entire life. We need to always be workers for the Lord. And so a better example of a good way to think about retirement would be a person who wants to set aside money to retire because they know that, hey, I'm going to work now because in the future when I turn 50, when I turn 60, I already know that I'm going to have these medical problems just as I age, that I'm not going to be able to work. And so I'm going to set aside money now so that when I get to that age, when I get to this point, when I'm not able to work, I'm not going to have to be dependent upon others. And then that way I can serve God more. I can serve ministry more. I can do more in the church. I can do more with our youth program, or I can do more. I can take some, audit some theology classes or whatever the case may be. I can do more service to others. I can help volunteer more at different charities when I'm not working because I've saved up for this retirement. And then once I retire, I'll be able to serve the Lord more because I don't have to worry about working 40, 50, 60 hours a week to earn an income. I've already earned that money. It's already set aside. God has blessed me with it. So now I'm going to use that money to support myself while I go into other fields of ministry and working for the Lord. So with that said, I want us to close our lesson here in the final 10 or so minutes, just considering some principles of stewardship that we do see in the Bible. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just kind of a starting point to get us to think more biblically about the future and about the present on how we approach money. So number one on our list of principles of stewardship in the Bible is to rejoice in the Lord's blessings. Right? That's one that you don't often expect to hear in a church service or in a sermon, that it's okay to enjoy the blessings that God has given us. I'll just share one scripture, Ecclesiastes 5:18 and 19. Right, Ecclesiastes, typically a book of sorrow. Right, the point of the book of Ecclesiastes is that all of life is meaningless without God. But within this book of relative sorrow, we see here that there are different points in which we are told we can be rejoicing in some different things in life. And so I want to share one of those things here in Ecclesiastes 5:18 and 19. And bear with me as I struggle with my phone here. I got a warning saying my battery is getting low, so I'm trying to plug it in so it doesn't die. And now with the cable set up there, I'm gonna have to rotate the phone. I apologize for anybody that's watching. It's gonna totally mess with you. But my battery's about to die, so I'm sorry for being sideways now. Ecclesiastes 5:18 and 19. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them, and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil. This is the gift from God. It's a gift from God when he richly blesses us. We can look at so many examples in the Old Testament, most prominently Abraham, one of the richest men in the land. Job, one of the richest men in the land. Joseph in Egypt, abundantly rich. David, Solomon, many kings. We know the prophets were pretty poor and destitute, but we see so many examples of people that were extremely wealthy in the Old Testament, that were godly men. Even in the New Testament, we know that the different missionary journeys, even Jesus himself, his ministry was supported by the free will donations of others who were wealthy, who were well off. And so riches are not inherently wrong. It's not inherently wrong to be rich. We can enjoy our blessings in this life. And to give a very real life, real application to this, sometimes us enjoying our riches is how we can best bless others. Right? Think of some local artists or local business owners in your area. Right? Holiday season's coming up. Okay, do you really need another, sign that says Merry Christmas or Silent Night or something about the nativity scene or baby Jesus or whatever the case is? Do you really need another one? Because I'm willing to bet you've probably got one for every room of the house if you're over the age of 30. Do you really need another sign? Is spending that $20-$50 on another sign to hang up on the wall or to sit on your front porch? Is that $50 actually something you need, or would that be better if you give it to the church, right? Because sometimes we think this way. Maybe I don't need this. Maybe I can get. But you know what? That local artist is dependent upon your having customers. And so sometimes when we buy things to enjoy the blessings of this life, to enjoy some material things, when we spend that money to support a local business, a local employee, we are blessing them. We are using our riches, we're using our blessings to bless others by paying them for their goods and their services so that they can provide for their families. So we support a local business today so that we don't have to support a homeless person tomorrow, right? Think about, if you are a small business owner, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You are completely dependent upon the goodwill of other people choosing to support your business. And so we can see an example of this in the Bible too. We know that Lydia was a seller of the color purple. Purple was a color, it was very rare. It came from seashells, and only the rich upper classes were allowed to wear purple. And so Lydia, her customer base, it's that like 0.1%. She's got a very small customer base, but her customer base, very wealthy. Because of them using their riches to buy this color purple. They could have bought a much cheaper color. They could have bought uncolored flour sacks. But because they wanted to buy the color purple to show their royalty, Lydia is able to have a nice job. And so sometimes, enjoying our riches, by paying for things we don't necessarily need, we are able to support others who are working diligently in their trade or in their craft. So that's just one example. But there's more to life than just enjoying our riches. And so now let me get to the other principles that should cause us to question how often we indulge ourselves in enjoying our riches, right? Because if that's where we stopped, yeah, enjoy your riches, that is not a biblical view. That's only a very, very small piece of the truth. So I'm going to go through this list and hit a few more. We're coming down on about 5 to 10 minutes left now. So principle number 2, our receipts reflect our priorities. Our receipts reflect our priorities. Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. He will hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and love money. Let's ask this question. How do we use our money to show that we love God more than money? If you were to pull up your bank statement, if you were to open up your receipt book, if you keep one, look at all the things that you've spent money on. What would it say about the priorities in your life? How much are you actually giving to the church? How much are you actually giving to those who are in need? How much are you buying just senseless, needless things? Not because you're wanting to support somebody local, but just because, hey, what's an extra $10 I spend here, or an extra $50 here? Hey, it doesn't really matter. How many things are you actually buying out of self-indulgence? Not because you are thinking this is a blessing and I want to help support someone else, but purely because you want to indulge in your own gratification. See, our receipts reflect our priorities. And so we need to keep track of how often we are actually prioritizing using our money in a way that would be a godly thing, and in a way that reflects our priority of seeking His kingdom first and of loving Him first. All right, number 3, don't increase your standard of living, increase your standard of giving. We saw that example with John Wesley. Look at a couple Proverbs here. Proverbs 19:17. If you help the poor, you are lending to the Lord and He will repay you. Proverbs 22:9. He who has a generous eye will be blessed, for he gives of his bread to the poor. I could go on and on. Almost every book in the Bible. I'm not going to say every book in the Bible because I don't know exhaustively. I don't have the whole Bible memorized. But I'm going to say nearly every book in the Bible contains some verse, some language about helping the poor. I read a statistic somewhere once that said there are about 500 verses in the Bible regarding prayer, and there are over 2,000 verses in the Bible regarding our use of money. That should tell us the way that we use money matters to God. Not because money itself is what's important, but the way that we use what God has given us is important. And if we are constantly seeking ways to increase our standard of living without ever thinking about how we can increase our standard of giving, we are living in an ungodly lifestyle. And we need to always be challenging ourselves to think about ways we can try to give more. Number four principle here. Debt and dependency are spiritually dangerous. Debt and dependency are spiritually dangerous. Now, there's a reason I say spiritually dangerous, right? Debt and dependency, not inherently sinful, okay? They are not inherently. Just because you're in debt doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Just because you are in a status of being reliant on others, of being dependent upon others, that does not mean you're inherently sinful, okay? But you are in a place where it could be spiritually dangerous. Proverbs 22:7. The rich rule over the poor, the borrower is a slave to the lender. Psalms 37:21. The wicked borrow but do not pay back. The wicked borrow but do not pay back. Folks, Christians, if you're in debt, we have not just a legal responsibility, but a spiritual responsibility to God to pay off our debts. That is a spiritual responsibility to pay back your debts. That is a thing that must be a priority in your life. Furthermore, 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 11 and 12. Live quietly, mind your own affairs, work with your hands, walk properly among others, and do not be dependent upon anyone. We see here a teaching from the Apostle Paul that it is a good thing to work diligently in what we do, to use our hands for work, to earn a living, to earn an income, so that we are not dependent on others. And furthermore, when we are able to provide for ourselves, we're not a burden to others. This is the whole point here, is that we're not to be dependent upon the generosity of others because we do not want to become a burden on anyone. Now, huge caveat. This is why it's not inherently sinful, right? Because there are going to be people who cannot work, who cannot earn an income, who cannot earn a wage. Those people need to be supported. That is why we work to not be dependent on others, because there will be people who are going to be dependent on us. So if you are able to work, you need to work so that you can take care of others who might be in a place where they are dependent because they can't work. And it is absolutely the right and godly thing to do to help those who can't. There's also going to be people who can work, who work very hard, very diligently, but for whatever reason, they're not making the big bucks, right? They're working very hard, but they just despite their best efforts, they can't get above that minimum wage job. Despite their best efforts, the fire burns down their home. The hurricane hits, cancer, some other medical thing hits that just drains every dollar, every penny they have. They're working hard, but they just can't get the ends to meet. We need to step up and help those people, right? And that is why, returning to our verse in 1 Thessalonians 4, 11 and 12, we work to not be dependent upon anyone, because there are going to be times when there's going to be others that might be dependent on us because there's a true need. And so those of us that are able to work, we do so to help those that are in need. Now, number 5, investing in the future is a way of serving others, right? So this is building on point number 4. Investing in the future is a way of serving others. You see, when we have our savings account built up, that is what allows us to be more charitable and to give more when there are needs that arise. And those needs are not just for the stranger, are not just for the neighbor, are not just for the Christian brother or sister as well, but that's even for our own family. We see here that in Proverbs 13:22, it's a good man that leaves an inheritance for his kids and his grandkids. It's a very godly principle to have that, that college fund set up, and have that life insurance policy set up, and have that savings account saved up so that you are able to take care of your children and your grandchildren in the future. That is a very godly thing to do, to have that long-term vision. You're not just putting stuff in dollar bills under the mattress that are going to be forgotten about, that are going to go rotten, that are going to spoil. You're using the money intentionally. You're putting it somewhere intentionally with a reason. There's a reason behind it. The reason is to take care of a very likely future need. And then we also see Genesis 41, 47 through 49. Joseph in Egypt. Joseph is made basically second in command under Pharaoh for all of Egypt. And it's through his faith in God and his wisdom to put aside some of their crop, to put aside some of their profit, so that in the time of famine, Egypt has a surplus. They're able to survive, to thrive, and to help others out in this time. And this is considered a godly thing. Joseph is commended for his faith in obeying God in this way when he interprets the vision of the famine. He's given much praise and thanks by Pharaoh, of course, but also Joseph's family as well for this foresight to save for the future. So it's a very godly thing for us to invest in the future. This would include things like our retirement funds. This would include things like setting up scholarship funds. You can look at almost any university in existence in America. It's almost guaranteed they have had somebody, a good, charitable, generous donor that has a scholarship fund set up because that person was wise and a good steward with their money, and they set aside money of their profit to help pay for other people's college in the future. Number 6, ministry matters. In the Old Testament, tithing was mandatory. It was like a mandatory tax. You had to tithe 10%. As a way to ensure the priests were taken care of, but also as a way to remind the Israelite people to always put God first, and to remind people to think generously and to think of God with their finances. However, in the New Testament, we know there's a free will donation. We know that giving to the church is based on giving joyfully of your own heart. But part of the reason, there's a lot of reasons for that, but part of them is that, hey, the preacher deserves a paycheck too, right? 1 Corinthians 9, verses 11 and 14. If we sow spiritual things among you, is it too much to reap material things from you? The Lord ordered that those who proclaim the gospel should get their living by the gospel. Right? Those who have decided to put themselves in the ministry position, to dedicate their lives to ministerial work, they have a right to an income. There's no expectation that they have to be like John the Baptist living out in the wilderness and eating crickets, right? It is completely authorized by God for the preacher and those that are working for the church, those that are working in ministry, for them to receive a pay for their work. And so we have to remember when we are coming up with our monthly budgets, right? It's good to give to the church, and part of that giving is it's good to pay the preacher, to pay all, not just the preacher, but anybody who's employed in a capacity doing ministerial work. It's a good thing to support them. It's a good thing to support them because they are giving up they could have gotten jobs doing anything else. They could have went anywhere, gotten jobs anywhere else and got an income, but they chose to work for the Lord. And so for the rest of us, let's make sure that they can support their family. All right, coming up, last one. A Christian never retires from being a Christian. Kind of already hit on this point once before. But to go back to that Luke chapter 12 parable with the rich farmer. All right, that rich farmer had this mindset of, I've got so much, I'm already rich, I've already got more than I need, and now I have an especially high yield. I can kick back, and I can retire. I won't have to work another day in my life. But what could he have done with that? He's already rich. Instead of just sitting back and thinking, I'm going to coast for the rest of my life, that type of surplus he could have given to the poor. He could have done more things that were beneficial with it. In Leviticus 8, 25 and 26, we actually see that the priests, they were given a retirement. They had mandatory retirement as a priest when they hit the age of 50, which it's a pretty generous life, to be honest, in that time period. But when they hit the age of 50, they were required to retire. However, they were expected to continue serving God by being a guide and a guardian for others, being a spiritual guide. So even though the priests would retire, they were still expected to work for the Lord. We'll close with this last verse. Consider this, Colossians 3, 23 through 24. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. All right, there's no retirement from serving the Lord Jesus. In all that we do, even in retirement from our temporary professions today, we're still to work heartily for the Lord. So it is a very good thing to save up for a very comfortable retirement. But remember, when you're saving for that comfortable retirement, use that time of retirement to continue working for the Lord. Be excited about, hey, you just put in 20, 30, 40 years of hard labor working, 40, 50, 60 hour weeks, and now you've got this retirement. And now you have the blessed opportunity to use all this free time to serve God in a larger capacity, to go volunteer for charity organizations, to keep spreading the Word of God and the love of God to others. What a blessed opportunity, what a blessed position you're in retirement. So that would be a more godly view of retirement. And so to close us off here, we'll end kind of where we began. Here's a quote from John Wesley when he was asked by a businessman the key to his success. And John Wesley answers, the key to my success is I fling money away as fast as it comes into my hands, lest it enter my heart. Boy, what a powerful word there. And I think if we all live that way, we will not ever be in danger of becoming like the rich that James chapter 5 warns about, those who are going to be facing fiery fate of fiery judgment from the Lord. So thank you for watching this video. Thank you for watching our sermon. Sorry that it did not get live streamed yesterday, but hopefully you enjoyed this study. And Lord willing, we'll be continuing our study with James chapter 5, picking up in verse 7 this upcoming Sunday. So God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time.